To start the day's proceedings, I would like to invite Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman, Institute of Supply Chain Management. Dr. Rakesh Singh is a well-known thought leader and speaker at various forums on supply chain, demand planning, forecasting, and then also renowned economist. He would be speaking to us about the theme of the event, and also some of the significant issues and challenges the transformations face. Welcome, Dr. Rakesh Singh.
Thank you, Girish. And good afternoon, all of you. Good evening, some of you, and good morning, some of you from other countries, those who are attending and speaking. ISCM SCM Pro Wing brings to you this first Leadership Transformation Summit in the domain of supply chain management. We thought that the world of supply chain across the world and in India has gone through an amazing transformation because of COVID-19 and the disruption that was to be seen post COVID-19. And this, what a disruption! It was a disruption on the supply side. It was a disruption on the demand side. The whole world stopped in terms of demand side, and I think such a disruption is a very rare event in the history of the world, and hence it created a new regime in supply chain itself, a new paradigm in supply chain itself. We have a friend, John Gatona, from the Gatona Alignment, which will take you through supply chain transformation. His book is an amazing book in that area, defining transformation for all time, but I think it has got an extra meaning this time in terms of transformation. Now, when we look at supply chain transformation, one of the significant trend that I saw was that the first time during these disruptions, what we saw was that everybody came in a huddle together, decided about their planning processes for the next day. The planning which horizon was reduced from 3 months, 1 month, quarter, year to just a single day, and even within a day, within hours. And planning for different scenarios, that's the second thing that happened. Planning for different scenarios in the sense that red, yellow, and green zone were themselves a scenario, and the kind of transformation that was happening on a daily basis geographically brought about a significant insight into how businesses would move and how do we plan in a very short period of time. My friend Saurav called it as hyperlocal, using the concept of locality. I think that is what happened. And in the process, one of the significant thing that happened was that everybody came in a war room. What John used to define in our forums and in personally, when we had discussions about dynamic alignment, I saw a glimpse of dynamic alignment that was coming alive during the period of disruption. And that gave us a hope for this transformation on the demand side, even on the larger strategic transformation side, and so on. We found that even on the supply side, one significant trend that has happened, and I think for India, like a country like India and Australia and others, there are also significant geopolitical shift in the world today post-pandemic, and we face a very strong geopolitical, dynamics in terms of our preparation. And from a country which happens to be the significant source of supply and a significant source of influence in today's economic world. Now, what do you do? How do you really look at it? So we saw a dramatic transformation, and I think leaders were very dynamic, who could really see the trend, secured alternate source of supply than China, and actually they made a very significant contribution to the transformation of their organization during the pandemic. But even within the single country sourcing, there are a lot of problems that exist, and that needs to be seen from a different perspective. I bring up a perspective of MIT. I think that large number of professors would talk about the same thing. They've done the same work. And hence I wouldn't give a credit to single Professor Yossi, but it could be Yossi and even David Sinchilevi. And there are some more colleagues from Harvard Business School that worked with them. It is very significant to understand your bill of material and where does your bill of material actually map with your different tiers of supply chain, and do you have visibility in the particular tier of supply chain in order? So that one theme of transformation that came through was that, do we really have any reach beyond the tier one supplier? If you don't have the reach beyond the tier one supplier, tier one, tier two, tier three, tier thousand, in automotive, Kalpesh is here to speak, you would say, how do you really understand the underlying risk? It was found during the tsunami that Ford had a 0.2% risk of a certain chips lying somewhere in the 13th tier, and that disrupted the business for around 2 weeks, because everything else was in place except that particular part, and it was because it was not mapped, the risk was not assigned. I think there's a very significant impact that we really need to look at from the supply chain transformation side. And I'm not calling planning, but I'm saying supply chain transformation, primarily because it is important to increase the visibility and connected planning approaches to the last tier of the supply chain based on a bill of material. A simple concept in your MRP and a production planning can help you align with technology that, and we're not going to talk about technology. We know what is the digital acceleration that's taking place, what is the advantage of digital acceleration. Second thing that we in India saw, Atmanirbhar Bharat, and that essentially for politicians it may mean do everything in India, but for businesses it has a little larger meaning, and this is why there's a note of caution that we cannot really, move away from China in a very quick time. We need to be thinking strategically. But one thinking that we can really do is that during the pandemic, if our time of survival was more than the time of recovery, then we are in deep trouble. Sorry, when the time of survival is more than the time of recovery, we are okay, we can actually manage. But if our time of recovery is more than the time of survival, then we have a deep trouble. And this is where a rethinking of your location of supply chain should take place into China +1, China +10, whatever you want to talk about. And that kind of transformation is very important in the process. So local becomes a very critical area in India, and countries like India needs to think about this particular and make a great stress test of this, whether the time of recovery and survival really make you stay where you are or make you move out of that place and really create a local base for it. And obviously diversify your local, diversify your supply and bring huge amount of mapping. There's a, in India we have Map My India, we had Lama Saps of the world, Resilinks of the world. Now, they may be subsumed with the larger players who provide APS systems, and we may see a huge amount of mapping activity, not only on the back-end side of the business, but even in the outbound side of the business, and that visibility may provide, and maybe everything gets subsumed into this connected planning. So that's one thing that really is a very important transformational parameter of visibility and mapping that I see it happening with a huge physical and digital connect that is there. And why I say digital, this is called a digital twin, and I can say that because this digital twin requires a physical mapping and a huge amount of use of what we see it in India. For instance, in India, the digital twin with physical twin means that we need to map our infrastructural dynamics of changes and development that would marry with the digital technology to create a very appropriate connected planning framework and a network, an autonomous network optimization process through the control tower. Some of the friends who have talked about in our earlier this thing. That is a very important aspect of it. Last but the least, and I think John will talk in a more elaborate way, in a more thought leadership way, but I think there is a need for us to understand that there has to be a very strong dynamic alignment between sales, finance, and supply chain within an organization. Primarily because sales looks at pipeline opportunity, finance looks at currency, supply chain looks at volume view or at the more granular level, and hence the focus of sales is on customer opportunity, focus of finance is more on controlling cost and managing profitability, and focus of supply chain is on maximizing customer through the production of a feasible plan. Do we have a single number that can really look into this? And I think this is here a great cause of caution. And I think we have among ourselves Vivek also speaking, and Vivek is an IBP leader in his own right. I think this is a very critical above the line situation where we need not only to align or integrate, but to harmonize and synchronize the different data definitions, planning levels, and focus of these functional areas to create a plan, a very feasible plan, which would marry the technology and bring visibility into this. So this is where the physical and the human angle, and there's a large need for really looking at the human angle in a big way, and skills and capability and ever the belt leadership changes, and change management becomes a very critical area. But I would also say that there's one more area that's very important. While we are talking about SNOP and IBP, we miss below the line alignment. And I've been seeing in our research that we are doing for SNOP with 100 organizations, and I may approach some of you to get some critical areas. I find that while the organizations in the last 5 years in India has moved very well in terms of leadership challenges and change management, their below the line activities have not been very well defined. For instance, what is your planning horizons? What is your planning synchronization? What kind of planning approaches do you need? How does a kind of a supply chain synchronization sits with medium to long-term planning called SNOP and IPP? And that is a very critical area. How do you manage your order management? How do you manage your demand sensing and demand signal? So this kind of an understanding of executional methods are quite, based on what I will call it as a firefighting approaches, a dynamic way, and Indian firms needs to look at very well. Finally, Joe Biden is here. We are talking about climate conventions, Paris conventions. I think we need to look at Paris Convention and sustainability in a big way. Due to lack of time, I don't want to get into details, but if you do not know, and we are dealing only with tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers, sustainability would be a big issue for organization. And as we move towards a global responsible citizen, I would suggest that mapping again will help you in sustainability. Your production planning, your factories needs to be sustainable, and your work conditions. Thank God to pandemic that there's a lot of thinking on the work conditions of the people. So I would suggest that these are the few dynamics which we see as a very critical areas of transformation, and leaders have to play a very big role in bringing this transformation from their own perspective, in their own ecosystem, in their own context. So with this, I think I invite all of you to the first Leadership Senate, and also I thank all of you to agree to share your viewpoint at the critical juncture where the thought process is evolving. Thank you very much. Back to you, Grace.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, and that was a very well articulated. You articulated the larger issues which underline transformational themes within supply chain. Essentially, we talked about governance issues within supply chain. You talked about sustainability. You talked about the planning challenges and also the technology challenges, and finally the human resource aspect of it. So that was a wonderful start to this